to the show, everybody. Tonight's a special night for us here on 880 ESPN. It's the first time that we'll get a chance to promote the Mets. They have a game tonight against the Diamondbacks, and I think that's kind of neat. We've had a football team, we've had the Knicks, we've had the Rangers, we've had the Islanders. We never had a baseball team.
We had Army football.
Right.
We were going because I go back to the very beginning, but we never had a baseball team. And now we've got my team.
Your team.
Yeah.
And I get a chance now to be somewhat of a distant cousin connection on the same team as Howie Rose. Never, ever before have we done that. Ever. You have been on the Howie Rose team at FAN.
Yes.
Me, never. I don't think he ever wanted anything to do with me.
No. He's a big fan.
Well, let's see. Howie Rose joins us now, the radio voice of the New York Mets. Hi, Howie. How you doing?
Welcome to our humble little frequency. All of you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Isn't it beautiful? Did you ever think this was going to happen?
Michael, I think this is hysterical. The voice of the Yankees leading into Mets broadcast. This is just too good to be true.
It is. Everything funky happens now. That's just the way the business is.
It is.
So let's talk about this team. Has this team's run, since they started off so poorly, has it surprised you?
Well, I'll tell you what. If you would have said to me coming out of spring training that their record would be what it is today, I probably would shrug my shoulders and say, that's about right. I didn't expect it to be as volatile as it's been. The ups and the downs have been, at times, rather extreme. But I think at the end of nearly 5 months, this is what I figured the record will be, and their standing obviously depends on the teams around them. And so they're very much in the hunt. They've got 3 games to go with the team that's in front of them. That'll be in the last week of the season. And I have every reason to believe that they'll be in this thing right down to that last week.
And it's been just amazing to watch Lindor. I think that contract is really unfair. Obviously not to his bank account, but I guess to how we perceive him, because he's been looked upon up until this year, Howie, is probably a disappointment because of the level of the contract. But boy, this year, I don't think they're even close to the position they're in without him.
Well, there's no chance. I agree with that. And I think Francisco's biggest problem was in his first year trying overtly and pretty much admittedly so to justify the contract. If you remember, he got off to a very slow start in 21, which was his first year, and the fans were getting on him. And he would voluntarily speak after the game about how he heard the fans booing and it bothered him. And, that raised a lot of antennas because that told you that he was so aware of the inherent pressures and the reaction to it from the fans that it was affecting him. And I think he's grown more comfortable in his own skin. I know that when Javi Baez got there a few years ago, I think that frankly exacerbated Francisco's problems. I didn't think that was going to be a good combination. And when the Mets chose not to re-sign Baez, well, I mean, now he's done for the year. He's having hip surgery, but, that's certainly proven to have been the right decision. And I think that just solidified Francisco's role as a potential leader in that clubhouse beyond the first year. He has certainly absorbed that and worn that mantle very proudly and effectively to the point where he's the unquestionable leader of the team.
All right, so you split 4 games in San Diego. And the last one was a real kick-in-the-teeth game. I mean, you get over it, but it's one that will linger just for a little bit. And really, it was like kissing your sister. You didn't gain any ground on San Diego. So you start a 3-game set with Arizona today, Howie. And if you have any intention of catching Arizona, because I know right now your sights have to be on Atlanta, you almost have to take 2 out of 3, and that might not be good enough because they're so far ahead. I think you almost have to sweep if you want to try to catch Arizona.
Well, certainly if that's going to be the objective, yeah. But I think right now it's not even a matter so much of who you're playing. It's that you've got to win 5 out of every 6 or 7 right now. And it really doesn't matter as far as Arizona's concerned. They're far enough ahead of them right now so that's not I won't use the word beauty because I hate the 3 wild cards. Think of it. Whoever clinches that 3rd wild card on the last day of the season, their fans can yell and scream, "We're number 6! We're number 6!" because really that's what it is. And, we've been around long enough to remember when finishing first was everything and the only thing. So, I think with the cluttered postseason as it is, you don't worry so much about the position as you just do getting in. And we've seen the ramifications of that over the last couple of years, certainly in the National League, the way the Phillies and then the Diamondbacks made charges all the way to the World Series. So, if they can get hot enough to where their sights can be squarely focused on that first wild card, tremendous, but I don't think that's even necessary. You've just got to win series and keep winning series right down to that last week.
So from your vantage, as close as you are, Howie, you still think this team could have enough? Because it does feel like we've been playing this very Metsian type game this year of a couple of weeks. I mean, Don early in the year was ready to sell off every single piece. Him and Michael are fighting like cats and dogs. Then they turn things around, and Michael's able to wave his finger in Don's face and go, see, and we're dreaming about a World Series. And then since then, it's sort of been this back and forth. It has felt very Metsian. Do you think this ends up being that kind of year where they just kind of end up fizzling, or do you get the sense this team has something there?
Well, I've vacillated with that so many times this year because you've seen the needle move from all the way in the red to all the way back down to the bottom, right? I mean, you look at how they left home for this road trip after their dramatic 2 out of 3 over Baltimore, with both games ending on ninth inning game-winning home runs. They've had that kind of, what do you want to call it? I don't want to call it magic, but I mean, they've had that resiliency to where they have been able to win games dramatically and encourage you that there's enough there from an emotional standpoint as well as a talent standpoint to hang in there. So I can't sit here with a little over a month to go and forecast, yes or no, whether they're going to get in or not. But I think they've got the goods to do it. And, as I've said a few times already, just win 2 out of every 3, 3 out of every 4 if you can. Get into that last week. You've got the 3 games in Atlanta. And I think that's the primary thing right now. If you're going to look 3 or 4 weeks ahead, which is all we've got left anyway, get to those games in Atlanta when they mean something. And don't forget, to me, what the Braves have done the last little while is borderline remarkable with the people that they've lost. And if you think there's going to be a little regression to the mean there, then, maybe the Mets have an opportunity to take advantage of that, too.
Here's what I struggle with, Howie. Like, you brought up the fact of the 3 wild cards, what Philadelphia did 2 years ago, what the Diamondbacks did last year. And we look at that as being great for baseball. We were actually off the air in a meeting. Tim Kirchin was there, and he's like, how great is it that there could be 10 teams that can win the World Series? And on the surface, that's great, but it's hard to celebrate that and then still say that your regular season has the same meaning. The more teams that go to the playoffs and 6 seeds making runs, Howie, tells me that these games are just not as important as they used to be.
Well, with the prize being in the past that you had to win the division, then it's 100% true, and I agree with it, and I abhor this system personally. But if you don't like this system, and I know Michael hears the same stuff I do, but I would be willing to guarantee that within 5 years, I mean, they've got to get a couple of stadium situations figured out, certainly in Tampa. Who knows what's going to happen in Vegas if that's ever going to reach fruition. But I firmly believe within 5 years, baseball is going to expand to where there are 32 teams, and they are going to radically realign this game, and the American and National Leagues, as we've known them, will virtually cease to exist, whatever they call them. And I would bet my bottom dollar that if they go to 32 teams, 16 of them are going to make the postseason. And you know why? Because the networks want it.
Right.
And when the networks say, we got this dough and we're willing to give it to you if you play along with us, everybody knows they all want every last nickel on the table. And so I think that's where we're headed. So as much as, you or I or Michael could look at this system and say, oh, man, it's so watered down, that's because we remember when it wasn't. But just wait. If you think if this is watered down, wait till you see how murky it gets a few years down the road.
See, I think I'm going to surprise you. We're talking with the great Howie Rose, Mets voice of the Mets on the radio side. I used to feel just the way you felt, but I think that something that holds back baseball, Howie, is that we look at it as religion, and that we look at all of any change to what they do as almost like a strike against the church. Every other sport has loads of wild card teams. Baseball's under what the NBA and the NHL and the NFL do, but for some reason, we just say, oh, this can't happen with baseball. Why can't it happen with baseball? Why can't baseball change and move with the times and make more money out of television? I don't think that's the most terrible thing anymore.
My argument to that has always been baseball is unique because we play twice as many games as basketball and hockey. So to me, who was it recently? St. Louis, I think. You play 162 games, right? And the Cardinals, I think it was 2 years ago, won their division. They had the third best record in the National League. So they played the third wild card team. And they lost in 2 games. I think that was to the Phillies, right? I don't remember who it was, but all I know is the Cardinals, I think it was, won their division. They played the third wild card team. They lost in 2 straight. So after 162 games, twice as many as the NHL, twice as many as the NBA, they go home after 2 games. And I think that system stinks.
But that Philly team ended up going to the World Series.
I get it because they got hot at the right time, just like an 8 seed can get hot at the right time in hockey or basketball. And if that's the way it's going to be, so be it. It just doesn't mean I have to like it.
Oh, yeah, but whether you like it or not, all my point was, Howie, is that it's hard to do that and then still say the regular season has the same value. I mean, we're hockey guys, right? So all we hear about is, the regular season, everybody makes the playoffs. Well, since they expanded to 32 teams, it's still only 16 that make it, but it's still getting held to the standard of 16 out of 21. It's not. It's pretty much the same.
Which happened. People need to know that actually happened.
Right. So the point is that if I've got to get the abuse as a hockey fan that your regular season doesn't mean anything, well, what you're talking about in the future, you can accept that and it can be fun, but it's hard to have both a meaningful regular season and have what you're talking about, because then that does mean I can have a really crappy first 2 months of the season and survive, similar to the way the Edmonton Oilers did last year.
That's exactly right. And the thing of it is, we can try to, quote, intellectualize it all we want and say this should be that way or that should be this way. But really, we just have visceral reactions to these things, right? They make these changes, and I don't think a whole lot about them before I decide how I feel. You just feel it, as I say, in a visceral way. And then if you feel the need to explain it because you're asked about it, you do so. But I've got to do it honestly. And I hate when, people, okay, boomer, or you're a fossil, or, you just can't accept the game the way it is now. The thing of it is, the one advantage of having been around long enough to remember the game when things were a little different is that younger fans who only know this system and may love it, and I love that they love it and respect them for loving it, but they didn't experience how it was the other way. So, they can or would have been able to pick and choose how they feel about something had they experienced both sides of it the way we did. All I'm saying is don't dismiss something that used to be as antiquated just because it's not today, and don't embrace everything today just because you didn't see yesterday. I don't know if that makes any sense, but this is what you're getting involed in with our frequency.
Guys. I think
gibberish right. Like I just threw out.
I think you just made a T-shirt is what you did. Anywhere in the middle of the Mets preview on 880 ESPN, driven by Ramsey Moss. And Howie, I knew Carlos Mendoza for a long time. Versus, most recently he's a Yankee bench coach. He's been in the organization a long time. Always liked him a great deal, and I think he's doing a terrific job with the Mets. How about your dealings with him, and what are your thoughts on Mendoza?
I cannot speak highly enough about how I feel about Carlos. And, I've said this for what it's worth to anybody who would listen among the hierarchy in the Mets organization from the top right on down, is that he has checked every box. For me as a media member and a team broadcaster, for our needs, that's one thing. But just in terms of being the quality human being that he is, there are no games, there are no double entendres, there are no hidden agendas. You ask him a question, he looks you in the eye, he gives you an honest, as best he can, answer. And, he's just a mensch. He's a human being. And I think from a more important perspective about how it relates to the Mets and to the team, the players, he has been, and maybe this sounds cliche because you've probably heard it 1,000 times before, but remember all that volatility we referred to about how this season's been such an uncanny variety of ups and downs? He has been the exact same person from the beginning of spring training through the bad April and May, through the tremendous June and into July, and the ups and downs since. He hasn't wavered one bit. And when you ask guys in that clubhouse what they've most appreciated about Carlos, that's the thing almost unanimously they will point to. He has been an absolute pleasure, and I have enjoyed talking to him, getting to know him, and watching him run a club as much as anybody who I've seen do this in all the years I've been around the Mets.
How do you think this Alonso thing is going to turn out?
Well, I think that what we've seen in this game over the last number of years is an increasing reluctance on clubs' parts to engage in very expensive 6-7-year contracts for guys who are in their 30s. Certainly, pitchers are the most evident because you think back to last winter and probably had a right to expect that Blake Snell would have gotten a longer deal than he did. Jordan Montgomery off of the postseason he had, same thing. And I think in Pete's case, as an offensive player who's going to turn 30, and that's the key, when he plays his first game on his next contract, it'll be his age 30 season. If I had to bet today on how this is going to go, I would say that the best chance the Mets have of holding on to him, unless they desire to get into one of those 6 or 7 year deals, it's big money. I don't see it going that way. I think if they were to put forth a really big average annual value on about a 3-year deal, that would be the best chance I think he and the Mets would have to stay together. I think Pete's going to want more than that. I'm not convinced the Mets are willing to go more than that. But that's just me. That's not, as per any discussions I've had with any of the decision makers. That's just my feel for it.
Any concern at all, the absence of power by Alvarez?
Yeah, a little bit, and I think it goes back to, the thumb injury. And I don't know whether or not there have been any tweaks that he's made, because I'm no hitting guru, but I do know that the power, as you suggest, has not been there, save for his dramatic home run of a week ago against Baltimore. This is a guy who has, I think, grown defensively ahead of what their expectations probably were. And I think that a lot of what he's done has been the product of working so hard and spending so much time to the point where I just wonder if they need to kind of pull back on him a little bit and say, you know what, come in a little later today or do a little less. I know he's a kid that's put a great deal of pressure on himself to sort of galvanize among the pitchers towards him and create what seems to be a great relationship. The pitchers genuinely like pitching to him. Mm-hmm. And I think that he's probably going to need to dial some things back a little bit, apart from whatever mechanical or physical reasons there might be for the recent power shortage.
I'm really curious. Are you tracking the White Sox the way I am? Are you hoping they break that Met record?
Yes. What do you mean break? No, I'm hoping they win 41 or lose 121.
Yeah, I want them to be the worst team in the history of baseball.
You want it. So you want the Mets to lose the distinction of the original 1962 Mets being thought of as the worst team ever.
Yeah.
See, I feel a little differently.
Okay, because you lived through it, so that's why I asked you.
Yeah. Gary and I have talked about this. We're kindred spirits, particularly in that category. I think that if you can go far enough back to 1962, and I mean, I was 8, so it's not like I had this long, tenured history as a baseball fan, but I do remember what Casey Stengel meant, who he was, what he did to create what that team was in terms of their image. I mean, who loses 120 games and is as beloved as they were? And before long, they were outdrawing a dynastic Yankee team to the point where, by 1969, they certainly owned the town for several years, as they did again in the 80s. But to me, the thing about 40 and 120 is that it's symbolic of what it took back in the day before you could buy your way into contention. In 1962, the reserve clause was still in effect. There was no free agency unless your team released you. So you had to trade your way, sign your way, and as of 1965, draft your way into contention. And so to go from where they were in 1962 to 7 years later in their 8th season, winning it all, to me, those bookends are so special and are so, to me, again, emblematic of what the Mets represented by 1969 because of what they've been in 1962. I hope 40 and 120 stands forever. And I would direct you, by the way, to the cover of the Mets, because both teams who participated in the World Series used to print their own World Series programs back in the day. But you can just Google this. Look at the cover of the 1969 Mets World Series program. It was an old Willard Mullen cartoon. Michael might remember him. I don't know if Don does, but he was one of the great sports cartoonists of all time. And I won't even spoil it for you. It perfectly typifies what the Mets were in 62, what they became in 69. And to me, that it's hard to call it symmetry when they were so lopsided and different, but that means a lot. And so I hope the White Sox win 41 or lose 121 or both.
I had a feeling you would think that way because I was born in '68, but my dad was a Met fan, and he left me the first 4 yearbooks of their history. So I've always had a thirst for everything before I was born, and picked my dad's brain about all those teams and stuff. So for somebody that was not alive at the time, I feel like I do have an intimate knowledge of that team. I just always wanted to kind of shake loose of being the worst team in the history of baseball. So I'm kind of rooting for the White Sox to be that. But
makes sense.
I get it.
I can understand having lived through that because that's their first yearbook. It's a little baby, and then they grew into just in a very short period of time the best team in Major League Baseball in 1969. So I can understand that, and you living through it, I can completely get that.
Anything you guys need to know about life on this frequency? You know, how the dishwasher works or, where the light switches are?
Well, where do we get...
The fire extinguisher. We need to know where the fire extinguisher...
What we really need to know is how do we get the traffic and weather on the 8s? How do we get the traffic and the weather?
Great question.
Because we keep missing that.
That's way above my pay grade.
Gotcha.
I think, we all know how to do that nowadays. I mean, look, if you're in New York, you're not going anywhere anyway. You're sitting in traffic wherever you're headed, so you don't need it. That's one of the reasons that they changed formats, because the traffic has gotten so bad around here that we just didn't need it anymore.
Yeah, you just sit in traffic and listen. Anyway, we're thrilled that we're on the same team. Thank you, Howie.
I am too. I look forward to talking with you guys again.
Thanks, Howie.
Awesome. That is Howie Rose, the radio voice of the New York Mets. And that's the Mets preview driven by Ramsey Mazda. It's the experience of driving a new Mazda and buying a new Mazda from Ramsey Mazda. Choose wisely. Choose Ramsey Mazda. Speaking of the Mets, we're going to have the manager of the Mets, Carlos Mendoza, joining us at 5:15.
Hello.
5:15.
How'd you pull that off? Good job.
A couple of phone calls here and there.
Wow.
If I wasn't able to pull it off, Peter, I would definitely need some better help.
I don't know if that's exactly what BetterHelp's intended to do.
Well, what's it about?
Well, this message is brought to you by